Alberta is now standing at a crossroads unlike anything we have seen in Canadian history. What was once brushed off as a fringe idea, even laughed at, is today a full-blown debate shaking the foundations of the nation. Alberta, the province that has carried Canada on its back for decades, is openly discussing leaving the Federation and becoming the 51st state of the United States. Let that sink in for a moment. This is no longer just frustration at Ottawa's endless taxes and suffocating rules. It has evolved into a serious, organized conversation spreading across the province. And the more the idea grows, the more the rest of Canada panics. Why? Because Alberta has reached a breaking point. And honestly, who in their right mind can blame them every single year? $20 to $22 billion vanish from Alberta's economy, siphoned straight into Ottawa's coffers. And where does that money go? To liberal strongholds like Quebec, the same regions that keep Ottawa in power. It is like handing your neighbor the keys to your car, watching him drive it for free, and then having him smirk at you when you ask for the keys back. And this is not a one-time favor. This is an annual ritual, a tradition of exploitation. When you add up the decades of this bleeding, the numbers are nothing short of criminal. Over the past 40 to 50 years, more than $600 billion has been stripped from Alberta. $600 billion. Gone. Siphoned. Vacuumed out and never returned. That is not a wild exaggeration. It is a cold, hard fact. And here is the kicker. If Alberta cuts those transfer payments and walks away, much of the country collapses. The Maritimes finished, Quebec unsustainable, Ontario left in crisis. If Alberta goes, the whole structure comes crashing down. And yet, despite being the lifeblood of the nation, Alberta is left to rot. Services fall behind. Infrastructure crumbles. And people are left staring at their bills wondering what in God's name their money is actually paying for. Meanwhile, Ottawa pats itself on the back, congratulating itself for being fair, inclusive, progressive, but let's call this what it is. Not sharing, not cooperation. This is robbery disguised as unity. Sharing means give and take. Ottawa only takes, and when Albertans dare to raise their voices, they are smeared as selfish. Whiny, even traitors to the so-called Canadian family. But tell me, what kind of family robs you blind every year and then lectures you for daring to complain? At some point, you stop calling it family. You start calling it abuse, and it does not stop at money. Alberta has been suffocated by a regulatory nightmare designed in Ottawa. Projects that would have fueled prosperity are either blocked, delayed, or outright cancelled. Pipelines. Forget it. Bill C-Steenite, the so-called No More Pipelines law, has kneecapped Alberta's energy industry. The tanker ban shuts down access to markets. Layer upon layer of climate regulations strangle the very sector that built Alberta's prosperity. And the insult on top of the injury, Ottawa pretends it is doing this for Alberta's own good, for the good of Canada, even for the good of the planet. Let's cut through the lies. Ottawa is not protecting anyone. They are destroying Alberta's ability to thrive while throwing crumbs of approval and demanding gratitude in return. Look at the numbers. 70% of Alberta's program costs are funded by Albertans themselves. Yet the province only controls 40% of its tax revenue. Translate that into plain English. Alberta pays the bills. Ottawa decides how the money gets spent. That is not governance. That is highway robbery, dressed up in the costume of national unity. And here is the brutal truth. Every single Albertan pays around $5,000 a year in transfers that get sucked out of their pockets and shipped to places that consistently vote Liberal. That is what fuels Ottawa's machine. That is what props up governments that despise Alberta's industries. Its workers, its way of life. So is it any surprise that the conversation about independence has moved from fantasy to reality? More and more Albertans are waking up to the fact that they are being drained, silenced, and sabotaged for decades. They have been told to wait their turn, to play nice, to accept policies written by bureaucrats in Toronto or Montreal who have never even set foot in rural Alberta. Enough is enough. Young Albertans, especially, have had it. Try being in your 20s in Alberta today. You cannot dream of owning a home. Wages are stagnant. Jobs are scarce. The ones you do land barely cover rent, food, and utilities. Families are scraping by while Ottawa celebrates its climate goals and pats itself on the back for being a global role model. For the younger generation, independence is not just about pride or waving a new flag. It is about survival. It is about the possibility of actually building a life without being shackled by a government that does not care if they sink or swim. And when you talk to these young people, you don't hear anger in the traditional sense anymore. You hear exhaustion. They are done. Done waiting. Done hoping. Done trusting Ottawa's empty promises. For them, the so-called radical option of independence is starting to sound like the only common sense option left on the table. Because when the system is stacked against you year after year, choosing to walk away is not radical. It is rational. And let us not forget, in just the last decade alone, more than $500 billion in investment has fled Alberta's resource sector. $500 billion that should have gone into schools, hospitals, roads, and jobs. Instead, it went to Texas, Asia, and the Middle East, places that welcomed development while Ottawa strangled it. Projects like Northern Gateway, Energy East, and Keystone XL could have transformed not just Alberta, but the entire country. Each one was killed off, not by markets, not by global competition, but by Ottawa itself. The message was clear. Alberta's prosperity is expendable. And so here we are, staring down the most consequential choice in Alberta's history: stay in a system that bleeds the province dry year after year, or finally cut the cord and decide their own future. Because let's be real, if this is what Canadian unity looks like, then what exactly is left to lose? Let's drill deeper into the disaster Ottawa has created. Because the scale of destruction cannot be overstated. In the last decade alone, Alberta has lost hundreds of thousands of jobs because of Ottawa's reckless policies. $500 billion in capital that should have fueled Alberta's economy simply evaporated, redirected to regions that actually want development. This is not some abstract number. It is the livelihoods of families, the future of young people, and the foundation of Alberta's prosperity ripped away. Think about the missed opportunities. If projects like Northern Gateway, Energy East, and Keystone XL had been built, Alberta would be exporting an additional 5 million barrels of oil every single day. At today's prices, that equals $55 billion in GDP annually. $55 billion. That is money that could fund healthcare, build schools, repair roads, and finally give Albertans the services they deserve. Instead, all of it was flushed away because Ottawa decided that virtue signaling to international elites was more important than putting Albertans to work. So what did Alberta get in exchange for all these sacrifices? Nothing but shuttered businesses, broken communities, and families left scrambling. And Ottawa has the audacity to call this progress. Progress for who? Certainly not for Alberta. It feels like Ottawa has deliberately set out to weaken Alberta, as though the province's success is somehow a threat to the rest of the country. Equalization payments keep the East happy. Climate regulations keep the activists happy. Meanwhile, Alberta is told to shut up and keep paying. But people are no longer shutting up. They are fed up. They are angry, and they are ready to walk away. The case for Alberta breaking off is right in the open now. Equalization was sold as a noble project, a way to keep smaller provinces afloat, but over time it morphed into a money hose, permanently set to drain Alberta's pockets while Quebec and Ontario lounge comfortably, collecting the checks. That's not fairness. That's a racket. Imagine if that money stayed in Alberta. We're talking $20 to $22 billion a year that would actually remain in the province. Instead of propping up regions that despise Alberta's industries, that money could transform life for Albertans overnight. Wait times in hospitals schools could add programs instead of cutting them. Taxes could actually decrease for once. The potential is staggering. Independence would mean Alberta finally keeps what it earns and decides how to use it. No more crawling to Ottawa, begging for permission to build a pipeline, start a project, or expand its economy. And make no mistake, people are organizing. Groups like the Alberta Prosperity Project are exploding in numbers. They are not some fringe collection of right-wing ranchers. As Ottawa's media likes to smear them, they represent hundreds of thousands of Albertans demanding a referendum. That is not smoke. That is fire. And the more Ottawa dismisses them, the more determined they become. Because nothing fuels a movement faster than being ignored and disrespected. And here comes the topic that makes Ottawa panic the most. The United States option, for most Albertans, independence is the first choice, but the reality is that the conversation about statehood is no longer taboo. It's happening at town halls, in community centers, in online petitions. People are openly asking, if not Canada. Why not the US? The logic is brutally simple. Alberta's oil, gas, and agriculture align perfectly with American markets. The US needs what Alberta produces, and unlike Ottawa, they actually build the projects that make it possible. Compare that to Canada, where every pipeline turns into a political war. Every investment gets strangled in red tape, and every dollar is treated as though it belongs to Quebec first. Is it any surprise that Albertans look south and see opportunity where Ottawa only offers obstacles? Critics laugh and say, oh, Alberta would never actually join the USA. But those same critics once said Brexit would never happen. They said Czechoslovakia would never split. History is filled with examples of people who were told change was impossible until the day it wasn't. And here's the reality. The more Ottawa resists, the louder the talk of statehood becomes. What starts as speculation could easily become the fallback plan everyone takes seriously. This is not about waving the stars and stripes tomorrow morning. This is about survival. If Ottawa refuses to let Alberta thrive, then Albertans will find another path. And for many, the United States looks like a far more reliable partner than the so-called Canadian family that treats them like a servant. Now let's talk about what happens if Alberta actually leaves. The fallout would be catastrophic for the rest of Canada. Nova Scotia has already admitted that its budget would collapse without Alberta's transfers. Quebec would lose billions that fund its generous programs. Programs Ottawa would never allow Alberta to fund for itself. Ontario would face the same fate. Even Ottawa itself would be scrambling to figure out how to keep the lights on without Alberta's cash. And don't let anyone tell you that Alberta is just bluffing. Because behind all the noise, polls are now showing a plurality of Albertans ready to vote yes in a referendum. That is not a small minority. That is a tidal wave of ordinary people who have had enough. Premier Danielle Smith is under enormous pressure because the demand for a referendum is not going away. It's growing by the day. Every time Ottawa mocks the idea or brushes it aside, support for independence only grows stronger. When people feel ignored, disrespected, and robbed, movements become unstoppable. That is what Ottawa still does not understand. This is not just politics. This is survival for Albertans. And here's the global perspective that Ottawa wants to ignore. History shows that when people demand freedom badly enough, nothing can stop them. Brexit happened. Scotland nearly broke away from the UK. Czechoslovakia split peacefully into two countries. All across the world, independence movements have proven that sneers, threats, and empty promises do not stop people who are determined to take back control of their future. Right now, Alberta's movement is fueled by decades of disrespect, billions of stolen dollars, and an Ottawa elite that believes it can get away with anything. That arrogance is their greatest mistake, because it is the very fuel driving Alberta closer and closer to the exit. The momentum in Alberta is no longer a whisper, it is a roar, and Ottawa is running out of ways to silence it. For decades, Albertans have been treated as little more than a cash machine. The province works, produces, and pays, while Ottawa dictates, regulates, and spends. But that game is coming to an end. The people of Alberta are waking up, and they are saying loud and clear, enough is enough. Let's be brutally honest here. This so-called national unity has been nothing but a scam. Equalization, climate schemes, regulatory blockades, each one has been used as a weapon against Alberta. And all the while, Ottawa pretends that this is about fairness. But fairness would mean Alberta actually has a say in how its wealth is used. Fairness would mean Alberta's industries are respected instead of strangled. What we have today is not fairness, it is exploitation disguised as patriotism. Take a hard look at the numbers. In just the last 10 years alone, more than $500 billion in investment capital destined for Alberta's resource sector has disappeared. $500 billion that could have funded schools, hospitals, and public infrastructure? $500 billion that could have created hundreds of thousands of jobs. Instead, it was driven out of the country by Ottawa's policies. Where did it go? Texas, Asia, the Middle East, anywhere but Alberta. And what did Canada gain by driving this money away? Nothing. Not cleaner air. Not better lives. Not stronger communities, just lost opportunities in a weaker Alberta. And yet Ottawa has the nerve to parade around the world, patting itself on the back as a climate leader. While back home, its own citizens are crushed under the weight of unemployment, high living costs, and stagnation. This is not leadership. It is sabotage. So Albertans face a choice. Keep being Ottawa's workhorse, whipped and drained until there is nothing left. Or finally take control of their destiny, and make no mistake, people are choosing the second option. The Alberta independence movement is not slowing down. It is exploding. Polls already show that a plurality of Albertans are ready to vote yes in a referendum. Not a tiny fringe, not a handful of radicals. A plurality, ordinary people, families, workers, saying they have had enough. Premier Danielle Smith can feel the pressure. Ottawa can sense the ground shifting. And the rest of Canada, they're terrified because they know that without Alberta's money, their entire system collapses. Nova Scotia's budget, gone. Quebec's social programs, gutted. Ontario's stability, shattered. Even Ottawa itself would face a fiscal crisis it could not survive. The cold reality is that Canada as we know it cannot exist without Alberta's contributions. And maybe that is the real tragedy here. For years, Ottawa could have chosen a different path. They could have respected Alberta's industries. They could have listened to Alberta's concerns. They could have built a federation based on fairness. But instead, they chose arrogance, control, and exploitation. and now they're shocked that Alberta is ready to walk away. Let's be clear about what independence would mean. $20 to $22 billion a year would stay in Alberta. That money could fund healthcare without endless wait times. It could strengthen schools, lower taxes, and build infrastructure that actually benefits Albertans. It could create a province that is free to say yes to its own projects without begging for approval from bureaucrats in Ottawa who don't even understand the realities of life in the West. And if Ottawa thinks this movement will just fade away, they are delusional. History proves otherwise. Brexit was dismissed as impossible until it happened. Czechoslovakia was expected to remain united until it peacefully split. Time and time again, people told they would never be free eventually proved their doubters wrong. Alberta is no different. When a people decide they have been pushed too far, nothing, no threats, no ridicule, no empty promises can hold them back. And that is where we are now. Alberta's independence is no longer a pipe dream. It is a real, viable option on the table. And if Ottawa continues to treat Alberta like an ATM, then one day soon, Albertans will slam that machine shut and walk away. Whether they choose full independence or explore statehood with the United States, the message is the same. They will not be exploited forever. The arrogance of Ottawa has created this crisis. And now, Ottawa must live with the consequences. The ground is shifting, the people are rising, and the movement is unstoppable. You can call it speculation. You can call it rebellion. You can call it whatever you want. But the fact remains, Alberta is not going to take this abuse forever. And when the day comes, whether in 2026 with a referendum, or sooner if the pressure keeps building, Canada will finally have to face the truth it has ignored for decades. Alberta is not a servant. Alberta is not a piggy bank. Alberta is a proud province that has carried this country for too long, and now it is ready to carry itself. Independence is not fantasy. It is reality knocking on the door, and Ottawa had better be listening, because Albertans are not asking anymore. They are demanding, and they will not be denied.